Okay, class, today we're going to be talking about the Sophocles play Oedipus the King. This is largely considered the preeminent example of Greek tragedy. Many of you might have even read this before. If not, you might also be familiar with the story. If not, that's okay. This lecture video is designed to introduce you to the play and its major concepts and themes. The image I've chosen for the opener here is the theater at Delphi. Delphi is the seat of Apollo and his altar, his most cherished and special place. Delphi features prominently in this play, as it did in our last play, the Humanities. Anyway, I'll say more in the next slide. So here are my goals for today. We're going to compare the opening of Oedipus the King with that of Aeschylus's Agamemnon. What is the conflict within Thebes? So I'll say more soon. We'll introduce Oedipus through this question. What is he famous for? He might be famous to you as a contemporary person through his association with the Oedipal conflict, which made famous by Sigmund Freud. But Oedipus has always been famous from the origin of his myth. So we'll talk about that. He's famous for many reasons, which we'll talk about today in detail. We'll analyze the role of knowledge in the play. Knowledge is something we've talked about a lot before. If you don't remember it, I would encourage you to go back to the video on Odysseus' return to Ithaca, the Odyssey 4 lecture. So this is number 14 for day 14. So I'd encourage you to go back to that lecture where I talk about that in detail. So, but we'll talk about that today in terms of this play, the role of knowledge. This play, for a lot of reasons and in a lot of ways, stages knowledge problems, epistemological problems. How do you know what you know? So to that end, we'll revisit our discussions of Aristotle's recognition, which is a way of knowing something. We'll introduce concepts that are also Aristotelian, namely the tragic flaw and reversal of fortune. These are two integral parts of tragedy, according to Aristotle, and this play, Oedipus the King, is Aristotle's preeminent example of drama because it plays on these three central things and other aspects that he thinks are important to tragedy, but recognition, tragic flaw, reversal. So we'll discuss these moments and why Aristotle is so drawn to Oedipus the King as the preeminent play. Okay, let's get started. So this is the opener to Agamemnon. If you don't remember this, please refer back to the video lecture for day 21, where I talk about this opener in detail. But I'm just emphasizing this because Greek drama typically begins with some sort of messenger figure, in this case a watchman, giving us information that hints at the central conflict of the play. So this watchman, his hints were the fact that there's been a problem based on the fact that the male figure is absent. Agamemnon, the king of Argos, is away at Troy. And meanwhile, while he's at Troy, while the watchman is watching for this signal fire, meaning that the Trojan War is over, there is someone who's taken the place of this man, this king, Agamemnon, and it's namely his wife, or that woman, the woman who's maneuvering around like a man. So this kind of hints at the central problem. What if women occupy the seat of power when men are gone? Like, what might happen there? And meanwhile, it's very terrifying. He can't stay awake. Yeah, so anyway, we talked a lot about this last time, so refer back to that. But this is the sort of convention that, like, a messenger character gives us the news. Let's compare the opener to Oedipus the King. Note that it's not a messenger, it's Oedipus himself who gives us news. Okay, so I'll read this whole thing out before we talk more in detail about its particular specific components and start to analyze them. So here are the stage directions in italics. So this, as I read this, I'm sort of like the narrator, so picture the scene in your head, and then I'll come in as Oedipus and speak. Okay, so many years have passed since Oedipus solved the riddle of the Sphinx and ascended the throne of Thebes. and now a plague has struck the city. A procession of priests enters. Suppliants, broken and despondent, they carry branches wound in wool and lay them on the altar. The doors open, guards assemble. Oedipus comes forward, majestic, but for the telltale limp, and slowly views the condition of his people. "O my children, the new blood of ancient Thebes, why are you here, huddling at my altar, praying before me, your branches wound in wool? Our city reeks with the smoke of burning incense, rings with cries for the healer and wailing for the dead. I thought it wrong, my children, to hear the truth from others, messengers. Here I am myself. You all know me. The world knows my fame. I am Oedipus." Okay, so let's break some stuff down. So first off, in the setting, we're in a city, the city of Thebes. This is a city in Greece that is associated with a kind of rival tradition to the Homeric tradition. The Homeric cycle of the Iliad and the Odyssey was very popular in Greece, but there was also a Theban cycle, which were works of literature associated with this city in Thebes, of Thebes. And this is one of our only existing examples of the sort of Theban cycles. So it's great that we still have it. But so Thebes is a important city. It's also sort of a tragic city. A lot of bad things happen in Thebes. Okay, so we're in Thebes. Oedipus is our king. He's not newly ascended. Let's see, many years have passed since he's become the king of Thebes. We'll talk more about the riddle of the Sphinx in the next slide. That's how he becomes king. But the important thing now, the conflict of this play, is that there's a plague that has struck the city. So kind of similar to the pandemic, some kind of horrible sickness has struck this city. We'll learn more about the sickness in a second, but that's important. Also important is the fact that we're not only in Thebes, but we're before an altar. So we're in a place where, in a time of sickness, people are turning to religion for help. So that's usually pretty bad. Usually when you're sick, you turn to a doctor or something like that. But I know the ancient times are a little bit different too. But this is such a bad plague that this whole city is praying. They're like, please help us. Gods. Priests are entering before the altar and praying. Okay, other things. What's interesting is instead of thinking about praying at the altar of the gods, Oedipus, his language is interesting. He says, "Why are you here, my children, huddling at my altar, praying before me?" So this should kind of give us some pause here. These children, these priests, are not praying to Oedipus. They're praying to the gods. But Oedipus, as the king, he kind of makes a slip there. He's sort of suggesting that these people are here to pray to him for help. Rather interesting. There are things that a king can do to help a city, but he's not really the same as a god. So that might strike us as a little bit egotistical of Oedipus here. Other things, the world knows my fame. Speaking of egotistical characteristics here, Oedipus's speech really emphasizes himself. Here I am myself, you all know me, the world knows my fame, I am Oedipus. Very braggadocious. He's kind of a braggart. Yes. Okay, I think I'll end it there. One other thing, like in relation to the last slide. There, it was a watchman telling us the news. Here we have Oedipus himself, the king of Thebes. And he is, in a way, commenting on the tradition of Greek tragedy by saying, "I thought it wrong, my children, to hear the truth from others, messengers. Here I am myself." To tell us the truth, presumably. So he's like kind of taking on the role of a messenger, in a way. You might notice also that he's sort of taking on a lot of roles. He's taking on the role of a messenger. He's acting like he might be sort of a god. Maybe he might be doing a little bit too much. He's the king. Maybe he should just accept that and stick to his role. But no, Oedipus wants to do everything. He wants to know everything. Okay, let's keep talking. Okay, so this slide is about his last phrase, "The world knows my fame." What is he talking about? What is Oedipus famous for? So you might know his curse. So there's various ways to answer this question. What is he famous for? So in one way, he's famous because he is cursed. He is this man who is incredibly cursed. He's cursed to kill his father and marry his mother. Oedipus himself knows this, that he was born with this curse upon him. He thinks he's outsmarted it, but we learned that that's not really the case. So what does he believe he's famous for? When Oedipus says the world knows my fame, he's probably not referring to this part of his fame, that he's got this curse. No, he's rather proud of himself in that line. The world knows my fame, I am Oedipus. He's famous for these two things, defeating the Sphinx and his limp. Oedipus means swollen foot. So back on the last slide when it was like Oedipus enters majestic but for a telltale limp, that's part of his fame, that he's this man who has ascended to greatness, to the role of a king, even though he's disabled. He's got this limp. In fact, his name Oedipus, refers to the fact that he's got a limp. So we'll learn more about this limp a little bit later, but that's kind of cool. Like he's so great of a warrior that even though he's disabled, he's like capable of doing very epic feats. He also believes he's famous for defeating the Sphinx. In fact, this is the thing that makes him king of Thebes. So we'll say more about that on the next slide. But here, for now, is a vessel where Oedipus is depicted slaying the Sphinx. The Sphinx here is depicted as a female figure. So this lady here. Okay, so that's one way of looking at her. She's this kind of female monster. This image emphasizes her femininity more than her monstrous nature. But, oh yeah. Okay, here I'm talking more about the swollen foot. So baby Oedipus was prophesied to kill his father. So what happened, I'm kind of spoiling some stuff for you, but what happened is because their baby was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother, King Laius, the father of the baby, Queen Jocasta, the mother of the baby, they pierce the baby's ankles, so literally like stab through both ankles of their child, tie his feet together so that he'll die, and they literally expose him out in the wilderness. To expose an infant is to leave them outside with the hope and expectation that they'll die. So it's a way of, it's infanticide, basically. But Oedipus he's amazing. He doesn't die, even though he was left to die. He doesn't. So, okay, we'll say more about that. I'm sort of giving away sort of the ending. But that's the point of the play, that at the beginning of the play, everyone kind of knows the ending. So, okay. He was raised by adopted parents, King Polybus and Queen Merope. So they're the ones, well, actually a shepherd finds him and then gives the baby to this king and queen of a rival city nearby, and they raise Oedipus as their own child. Okay. So at the beginning of the play, Oedipus believes he's avoided the curse. So does Jocasta. So Jocasta, his mother, she believes that she's killed her son, so that there's no way she's going to marry him. There's no way he's going to kill his father. But this is sort of the central kind of irony of the play, that Oedipus believes he's famous for all these great feats of his, but actually neither he nor his parents were able to avoid the thing he's most famous for, which is the fact that he's cursed to kill his father and marry his mother. And so this convoluted scene, this convoluted backstory, is why Oedipus believes he's only famous for his swollen foot and his ability to defeat the Sphinx, but actually he's famous for all this stuff. Okay, so let's talk more about the Sphinx. So this image here of the Sphinx demonstrates her monstrosity a little bit more. So she's this female monster who's kind of like part beast, part female. Here's the riddle of the Sphinx. So this is one of those Greek things where like the author assumes his audience knows the riddle so intimately that he doesn't need to spell it out. But unless you know this play, you might not know the riddle of the Sphinx. So I'm going to give it to you here. This is how Oedipus defeats the Sphinx. The Sphinx has been terrorizing Thebes, killing people, and she says someone can defeat her if they can solve her riddle. So here's her riddle. It's not explicitly referenced. Okay, the riddle. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the day, 3 legs in the evening. Do you guys know the answer? You might have heard this riddle in other places too, because it's like a very old riddle. The answer is a man. So a man goes by 4 legs in the morning. So this is sort of a metaphor of the human existence. Morning is when you're a baby, during the day is when you're an adult, and during the evening is when you're an old person. So a baby crawls around on 4 legs. When you grow older, you walk on 2, and then when you're very old, you use a cane, so you have 3 legs in a way. So Oedipus is able to answer this question, and by doing so, he defeats the Sphinx. Here's another image representing Oedipus defeating the Sphinx. So here, this female monster, he's kind of making eye contact with her. And we see how monstrous she is by the fact that there's these dead bodies and skeletons hanging around. She's killed many men before Oedipus, but Oedipus heroically defeats her by solving her riddle. Or does he? Is that just ironic? We'll talk more about that. So Oedipus saves Thebes from the Sphinx, and when he does so, he is granted the hand of Jocasta in marriage. So he passes this test, he solves this riddle, and Thebes has been operating without a king. It has a queen, so they marry the victor of the Sphinx to the queen. Great. Great job. Great job, Oedipus. Here, get married to Jocasta. She's very beautiful, I guess. Okay, so actually, what we know, because we know that Oedipus is cursed, we realize that solving the riddle is actually not a good thing. It's a triumph in a way, but it's a triumph that solidifies his curse. By winning, he has already lost. He's fulfilled the prophecy that he's going to marry his own mother. So note, the prophecy is already fulfilled at the start of the play. Oedipus just doesn't know it is. So when I was sort of, stumbling a little bit to describe this play, that's kind of the point of the play. That's a point that Sophocles is staging. He's not staging the action of the Oedipus myth. I mean, that would be pretty exciting, like a man kills his father, like Luke Skywalker or whatever, and then marries his own mother. Like, whoa, that would be pretty exciting, but that's too straightforward. Instead, Sophocles, what he's staging is knowledge, coming to know something, and how dramatic that can be. So that's the sort of conflict of the play, is that the curse has already been fulfilled at the play's beginning, and the drama of the play is that Oedipus is slowly realizing the fact that he's already doomed himself. He's already fulfilled the curse. So we'll talk about this going on. In fact, so I'm sort of suggesting that the structure of the play might be posing this sort of critique of Oedipus. Maybe Oedipus's problem is that he tries too hard to know things, or he assumes he knows things already or something, or he assumes he can know things beyond what fate has in store for him or something like that, So I hope this makes sense, the sort of irony of solving the riddle of the Sphinx. It's the thing that makes him feel smart and capable and triumphant, but it's also the same thing that dooms him. Okay, let's keep going. So trouble in Thebes. Let's talk about the conflict in the city itself. So that's kind of Oedipus's character conflict on the last slide, but the character conflict kind of manifests in Thebes itself. So here is early in the play, a priest refers to what's going on in Thebes. He says, "Our city, look around you, see with your own eyes. Our ship pitches wildly, cannot lift her head from the depths. The red waves of death. Thebes is dying. A blight on the fresh crops and the rich pastures. Cattle sicken and die, and the women die in labor, children stillborn. And the plague, the fiery god of fever, hurls down on the city, his lightning slashing through us, raging plague in all its vengeance, devastating the house of Cadmus. And black death luxuriates in the raw, wailing miseries of Thebes." Things are bad in Thebes, and I'll draw your attention here. So Thebes is literally dying. What does that mean? Well, a blight on the crops and the rich pastures. So it's an agricultural sickness. So the crops themselves aren't growing properly. They're blighted, meaning that they're like inedible. If you can't grow crops, you can't have pastures. Not only are humans going to be dying because they can't eat the crops, but also the cattle are going to die too because the pastures, the grass isn't growing. So like no one's thriving here. So crops are dying, cattle are dying. What can humans eat? Nothing, it seems. It's also a reproductive plague. Women are dying in labor. Children are stillborn. So women are dying. The babies that they die bearing in birth, those babies are dead as well. This is horrible. How can a city survive if there's nothing to eat and if the city can't reproduce itself? If women are unable to give birth and births don't don't propagate into like more citizens, this is pretty horrible. So like the whole city is very much dying. It's under threat of this sort of societal collapse. Note as the priest talks, he emphasizes eyes. He's speaking to Oedipus here. Look around you, see with your own eyes. In a sense, this is something that Oedipus thinks he's really good at. Like, he wants to see the problem in Thebes. He wants to look and know. But this might speak to his character problem as well, that he's maybe too egotistical. He believes in his ability to solve problems and find the truth. But that is also the thing that will destroy him. And specifically through his eyes, what he sees and what he comes to know. And this is foreshadowing of what happens at the end of the play regarding Oedipus's eyes, which I'll talk about later. Okay, so compare the trouble in Argos. I just found this interesting, so I'm just drawing your attention here. So the trouble here is reproductive. That was the trouble in Agamemnon as well. It was violence breeding more and more violence. Here, it's kind of like the opposite of breeding, it's infertility. Which I find this interesting, that these two plays have reproduction in their minds as to the conflict there. Anyway, okay, so this is the problem with Thebes. Oedipus, of course, is going to vow to solve the mystery of why Thebes is dying. So he learns from a prophecy through Apollo that the reason why Thebes has a plague is because the murderer of Laius, the former king, has never been punished for his crime. So it's like this crime, this injustice has taken place and it's never been brought to justice. So Oedipus is like, okay, great, I know what to do. I'll find the guy who murdered Laius and we'll bring him to justice and then my city will be saved. As you know from the curse, the murderer of Laius is actually Oedipus himself. So he basically is vowing to find himself and bring himself to justice. So note with what art and ability Sophocles kind of ladens this text with irony. So as the audience, you would have already known Oedipus's myth. You would know that he's talking about himself in these lines. And so when you hear him speak, you'd be like, oh, Oedipus, no, dude, stop, Because he's basically, he doesn't realize it, but he's talking about himself. So I'll read these aloud and then think of the irony as I read this. Okay, so he says, no, I'll start again. I'll bring it all to light myself. So he means the mystery of the murderer of Laius. I'll bring it all to light myself. Apollo is right, and so are you, Creon, to turn our attention back to the murdered man. Now you have me to fight for you. You'll see. I am the land's avenger by all rights, and Apollo's champion too. But not to assist some distant kinsman, no. For my own sake, I'll rid us of this corruption. Whoever killed the king may decide to kill me too, with the same violent hand. By avenging Laius, I defend myself. Yikes. Note that he uses the similar language as the Aeschylus Oresteia trilogy. He sees himself as an avenger. He kind of is putting himself in the role of the land's avenger and Laius's avenger, kind of similar to Orestes in a way. Orestes was avenging his father's death by killing his mother. And so this is kind of a similar plot in a way. But Oedipus just doesn't realize that by avenging Laius, I defend myself. He doesn't realize that by avenging Laius, he's dooming himself even more. He's already been doomed to kill Laius. I mean, he's the man who killed his own father, so avenging Laius doesn't really make sense except for by potentially killing himself, I suppose. Anyway, we'll see what happens at the end of the play if Oedipus avenges Laius by killing himself or not. Anyway, keep going. So this is kind of part of the conflict of the play. It's being driven forward by Oedipus's curiosity, by his drive to know. So here's some examples of that. So after a painful search for the answer of the problem with Thebes, I found one cure. I acted at once. I sent Creon, that's his wife's brother, his uncle. He doesn't know it's his uncle yet. He thinks it's his brother-in-law. Okay, so I sent Creon, my wife's own brother, to Delphi, Apollo the prophet's oracle, to learn what I might do or say to save our city. So he seeks knowledge. He sends people to find out at the oracle of Delphi. This is Apollo's seat. True, still, that shepherd, someone fetch him now. So this is later in the play when he learns that the shepherd who saved him as a baby has knowledge about his parentage. So he's like, oh, let's go find that shepherd. He'll know, and he'll tell me who my parents are. Yikes. And then this line, this is towards the end where he's just kind of delving into his own ruin. Listen to you no more. I must know it all. I must see the truth at last. He's driven to know and to see the truth, even when that truth will destroy him. So, like I said in a previous slide, this play is populated throughout with dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is the difference between what we as the audience know and what a character knows. So we know a lot more than Oedipus knows in this play. So here's a really good example of dramatic irony in the play. He's speaking here. Now my curse is on the murderer of Laius. Whoever he is, a lone man unknown in his crime, or one among many, let that man drag out his life in agony, step by painful step. I curse myself as well. If by any chance he proves to be an intimate of our house, here at my hearth, with my full knowledge, may the curse I just called down on him strike me. Excuse me. So everything he says here becomes true later. The murderer of Laius will be dragged out. His life will be dragged out in agony, step by painful step. This is literally what will happen to Oedipus. He'll be in pain, his life in agony. He also curses himself, and curses himself twice, really, because he's going to curse himself as the murderer, and he's cursing himself because the murderer will be proved to be an intimate of our house, meaning like someone who is familiar to the household. Who is more familiar than Oedipus, the son of Laius? And he's also very familiar with his mother/wife. So yeah, we'll talk more about that. Okay, so of course, this is it should remind you of this concept of recognition we've discussed so far in this class. So remember, go back to lecture 14 for more on this. But anagnoresis, hard. But it means recognition in Greek. It is the startling discovery that produces a change from ignorance to knowledge. It's discussed by Aristotle in the Poetics. It involves a revelation of the true identity of persons previously unknown, as when a father recognizes a stranger as his son or vice versa. So in this case, our son Oedipus will come to recognize his father through his recognition of the fact that he has killed his own father. So Oedipus stages some very tragic recognition scenes here. Compare Oedipus's tragic recognition to the recognition scenes in the Odyssey. So I really do encourage you to go look back at lecture 14. The recognition scenes in the Odyssey were so positive. They were like a son coming to know his father, a father coming to recognize his son as his own, a wife coming to recognize her husband based on who he was in the past and now who he is before her in the present. These beautiful moments of recognition that are filled with tears, but happy tears. All of that is inverted here in Oedipus, where the recognition scenes are very tragic. And so we'll talk more about these scenes in the coming slides. Okay. So we talked about this with the Odyssey. Telemachus was careful as he answered Athena, "Dear guest, I will be frank with you. My mother says I am his son, but I cannot be sure, since no one knows his own begetting. Remember what we said about this. This is an epistemological truth. No one really knows where they come from. They don't really know their father, the man who sires them, because because of the dynamics of heterosexual biological reproduction. It's much more easy to know who your mother is, the woman who gave birth to you, because you literally come out of her. But someone who sires you, it's a little bit harder to know your father or your own begetting. But what's interesting in Oedipus is that Oedipus is someone who does come to know his own begetting. He comes to know his own begetting very intimately. In fact, he realizes that he has been having sex with his own mother for a number of years. How could you get closer to knowing your own begetting than that? He knows exactly where he came from, which is pretty horrifying. And where Telemachus's problem was, how can he know his father? Oedipus, in a way, has sort of become a version of his father in sleeping with his mother. Okay, so in this play, we have another meeting with Tiresias. So we met Tiresias in the Odyssey as well. He was the guide for Odysseus as he encounters the underworld. And so we meet Tiresias again, and he serves a similar role here. He's the guide for Oedipus. He's a prophet. He tells him what he needs to hear, even when what he needs to hear, he can't really listen to it at this moment. Just a reminder about Tiresias, he has lived as both a man and a woman, so he has kind of more knowledge than most people. So here's Tiresias being a prophet. So look for book 11 if you'd like. So Sophocles uses the character to speak truth to to Oedipus. So even Oedipus and Odysseus sound similar. So Oedipus is like the tragic Odysseus in a way. Okay, he's also sort of the tragic Telemachus. Okay, so here's a back and forth between them. I'll do voices. Oedipus says, "Riddles, all you can say are riddles, murk and darkness. Ah, but aren't you the best man alive at solving riddles? Mock me for that, go on, and you'll reveal my greatness. Your great good fortune, true, it was your ruin. Not if I save the city, what do I care? Well then, I'll be going." So this is just kind of like a little excerpt of them kind of going back and forth at each other. Tiresias mocking Oedipus for his ego, thinking he's smarter than everyone else. When actually he's really, dumb is the wrong word, but he just is so ignorant of the fact that he's already screwed up. And his ignorance is kind of blinded. He's blinded from his ignorance by his ego, in his belief in his abilities, his intelligence. Okay, so here's what Tiresias says to Oedipus that I find just kind of encapsulates what's to come for Oedipus. So this is the sort of prophecy that Oedipus hears but can't quite know at this moment. He's not in a place where he's ready to acknowledge the truth of these words. He's still in denial. If you want to use sort of like Freudian language, or the language of psychology, you can kind of see why a psychologist, or why Freud specifically, would be drawn to this play. Okay, Tiresias says, "I will go, once I have said what I came here to say. I will never shrink from the anger in your eyes. You can't destroy me. Listen to me closely. The man you've sought so long, proclaiming, cursing up and down, the murderer of Laius, he is here. A stranger, you may think, who lives among you. He will soon be revealed as a native Theban, but he will take no joy in the revelation. Blind who now has eyes, beggar who now is rich, he will grope his way toward a foreign soil, a stick tapping before him, step by step." So I'm highlighting this little line here. Blind who now has eyes, beggar who now is rich. This is foreshadowing. It's a description of Oedipus himself. Oedipus has eyes at the beginning, he'll soon be blind. He's rich now, he's the king of Thebes, he'll soon be a beggar, groping his way because he's blind toward a foreign soil. He'll be trying to get outside of Thebes because he'll be revealed a native Theban. So Oedipus has always been from Thebes, even though he seems like he wasn't now. And then this is foreshadowing to a stick tapping before him step by step. This is largely, critics see this as a reference back to the riddle of the Sphinx. Oedipus, in some ways, has fulfilled he's not only fulfilled the curse, the prophecy, he's sort of also, throughout this play, he fulfills the riddle of the Sphinx. We learn about him as a baby, we learn about him as a man, and then we see him at the end of the play as an old man. He's not necessarily old, but he's blinded and he has a cane. So he ends up being the three-legged man of the riddle of the Sphinx. Okay, one other thing too is I'm just highlighting stranger here. This play has some interesting things to say about native people versus strangers. The stranger, it's in some ways it's easier to think that crimes are committed by strangers, like someone who comes into a community and ruins the community or like threatens the community. The community is stronger without these strangers, kind of things. But actually, just like in this play, like statistically, you're much more likely to be harmed by someone you know. This goes for like assaults, sexual assaults, and all these sorts of things. Often it's not a stranger who you should most fear, it's actually the people around you. And that's the case for this play as well. Oedipus is convinced that only a stranger could have killed Laius, but we learned that it was Oedipus himself, Laius' son, who kills him. Okay. Anyway, this play is pretty wise, I think. Okay, so let's talk about the chorus. In this play, the chorus is really interesting. They have a sort of characterological arc as well as Oedipus is. At first, the chorus trusts Oedipus and they doubt Tiresias. So at the beginning of the play, everyone is on the side of Oedipus. Think about how you would be very proud of Oedipus. He's the guy who defeated the Sphinx. The Sphinx was torturing the city. Oedipus defeats them. Yay, great. So they really truly believe in his abilities. Here's kind of an excerpt from one of the choral odes that puts them on the side of Oedipus. They doubt Tiresias. So Tiresias gives Oedipus that warning. The chorus, so on the side of Oedipus, they doubt Tiresias. So Zeus and Apollo know, they know, the great masters of all the dark and depth of human life. But whether a mere man can know the truth, whether a seer can fathom more than I, there is no test, no certain proof. Though matching skill for skill, a man can outstrip a rival. No, not till I see these charges proved will I side with his accusers, meaning Oedipus's accusers. We saw him then, when the she-hawk swept against him, but with our own eyes his skill, his brilliant triumph, there was the test. He was the joy of Thebes. Never will I convict my king, never in my heart. So this is an interesting moment. They pledge to never convict the king, never in their heart. They'll always be on Oedipus's side. And note that they choose Oedipus over an instrument of the gods. So they're saying, like, we trust the gods, we trust Zeus and Apollo, they know. But a mere man, can he really know the truth? They're talking about Tiresias here. Tiresias is human, but he's a prophet. He is aligned with Zeus and Apollo. It's strange. I think Sophocles is pointing out that, like, they're wrong to doubt Tiresias. He's a prophet of the gods. They should trust the prophet over a king. But they do the opposite. They trust the king over this prophet. Okay, so this is where the chorus starts off, but they have these moments throughout the play where they like come to their own sort of recognition of the truth as well. This is an adaptation of Oedipus that was put on by a South Korean acting troupe in Australia. This is the chorus, what they look like. So I think it's men and women. But they kind of go through the motions of realizing the truth themselves. I just have images. I wish I had seen this or have a version you could view, but I unfortunately don't. But I can show you some stuff to read more about this adaptation. The chorus, we have this moment where this is clearly a visual cue to what happens to Oedipus as a baby. His feet are bound. So maybe the chorus is identifying with Oedipus a little bit. Here's kind of towards the end of the play when they realize the truth. Note that their realization of the truth kind of also involves them stabbing their eyes. They've seen something that they don't want to see, so they kill their eyes, in a way. Okay, so the chorus begins to doubt Oedipus at some point. We get a clue here, so this is, line around line 960-ish. Okay, so they have this weird moment that sounds interesting. We'll analyze it in a second. So the chorus, reading all together, they would say here, so pride breeds the tyrant, violent pride, gorging, crammed to bursting with all that is overripe and rich with ruin. Clawing up to the heights, headlong pride crashes down the abyss, sheer doom. No footing helps, all foothold lost and gone. But the healthy strife that makes the city strong, I pray that God will never end that wrestling. God, my champion, I will never let you go. But if any man comes striding high and mighty in all he says and does, no fear of justice, no reverence for the temples of the gods, let a rough doom tear him down, repay his pride, breakneck, ruinous pride. So sometimes this is excerpted because it is a condemnation of the sin or the unvirtue of pride. So you can tell, like, they're not viewing pride as a good thing here. Pride breeds the tyrant, ruinous pride, breakneck, ruinous pride. They condemn proud men who come striding high and mighty in all they say and do, with no fear of justice, no reverence for the gods. You can see here that they're turning on Oedipus. Remember how Oedipus couched himself at the beginning, my children, you're praying at my altars. That was him being very proud, being very high and mighty, lacking reverence for the gods. I mean, he might have revered the gods a little bit, but he certainly revered himself a little bit more. And the chorus is aligning pride with tyranny. So I'll say more about the tyranny in a second. I forgot about this. Pride. This is likely the Greek word hubris. So you might have heard this word before. It's popularized through Aristotle. Hubris roughly translates as pride, but it's a little bit more specific. Hubris is like pride to the detriment of all other things. Yeah, it's like. And in some ways, pride, this kind of hubris might be justified. Usually the heroes of these plays who feel this kind of hubris, they have a real reason to. And same with Oedipus here. He should be proud of himself. I mean, he is amazing. Like, he does defeat the Sphinx and everything. But his utter belief in that pride, that tends to be the thing that turns him from a hero into a tragic figure. Because that pride is his downfall. So this chorus links hubris or pride with tyranny. Tyranny, you probably know this word through contemporary usage of it. It's often now just seen as kind of like government that is bad, I guess. Like it's tyrannical government, someone who is overreaching their political role and kind of taking over too many things, like they're just being too much. Like it might be a tyranny to like imprison your populace or something like that. Tyranny in Greek, it began as a way of referring to the king himself. So Oedipus the king is actually in Greek Oedipus tyrannus. You might know this word tyrannus from Tyrannosaurus Rex. Rex is also king. So Tyrannosaurus Rex, it's like the king of kings of the dinosaurs or whatever. A tyrant, it might just be a king, but it might also be a king who is overreaching his rule. I'm emphasizing this because remember our setting for this play, not just Thebes, but ancient Greece in its democracy phase. I think it's a very strategic move by Sophocles to stage a play where a king runs rampant, like he's too egotistical and too proud. He's staging this play in front of an audience who is invested in democracy. So in this in this speech here, there's sort of an implicit condemnation of monarchy. because monarchs can tend to be tyrants. Like, they don't necessarily become tyrants, but monarchy itself just has a tendency to breed pride and to breed tyranny, to breed irreverence for the gods. And conversely, Sophocles, I think, is suggesting that democracy is the better way of organizing a political system because it doesn't breed pride and tyranny in the same way, if that makes sense. So this is pretty interesting. I hope you find this interesting. But like the sort of political ramifications of this work of literature are, I think they're in there. It's baked in. Okay, so here's some recognition scenes. So the chorus has them. Oedipus has them too. So there's a lot of these. I just was trying to be schematic about it. So I find these kind of scenes where Oedipus seems to recognize something. And they're kind of like steps towards his ultimate recognition of the fact that he's already fulfilled the curse. So early in the play, he vows to cure the land of Thebes by driving out the murderer of Laius from Thebes. So he doesn't realize he is the murderer yet, but he does recognize that a murderer should be driven out of Thebes. You know, he hadn't known this before. He hadn't known that this is the sort of problem of Thebes, that like there's a murderer who has gone unpunished. So he's like, okay, well, if we find the murderer, he should be punished. Let's drive him out of Thebes. So he recognizes that. So in a way, he is vowing to find and exile himself. He doesn't know that yet, but that is what he's doing. Oedipus curses the murderer of Laius. So he recognizes it, a step further, that like the murderer of Laius should be cursed. So he is cursing himself there. He doesn't realize that part yet, but he knows something. He finally realizes that he is the one who killed Laius. He's the murderer. He's cursed. So what I'm referring to here is he realizes that this is kind of in the middle of the play. He's like, there was a guy at a crossroads that I murdered. That's right. It's like, I think I did kill Laius. He doesn't really do it exactly like that, but they realize, they learn that Laius was killed at a crossroads. Oedipus has this moment, this light bulb moment. He's like, oh, that's right. I killed a man at a crossroads. Oh my God. I killed Laius. So he kind of realizes he's killed Laius, but he doesn't realize that he's killed his father. Because at this point, when he realizes he killed the previous king, he doesn't know that he is the son of the previous king. So he takes comfort in his own adopted father's death. He's like, okay, he doesn't know he's adopted. He's like, well, my dad died. Polybus died. I didn't kill my dad, Polybus. He just like realizes that he should avoid his mother, Merope. But at this point, he doesn't realize that these guys are his adopted parents, and actually he has killed his biological father. And then this is the big moment when he finally recognizes the truth of everything, that he's killed his father in killing Laius, that he's married his mother in marrying Jocasta. So after learning a shepherd saved him when he was a baby, and learning that the baby was Laius' son, these are the two clues that in his brain he connects, and he realizes. He's like, if this is true and this is true, then this must be true. So shepherd saved me as a baby. The baby that the shepherd saved was Laius' son. Oh crap, I am Laius' son. So he realizes he has already married his mother. He's already killed his father. So there's kind of this moment. And so if you were the actor at, saying this moment, you would, I don't know how you would play that. It would be a lot, but it's pretty exciting. Compare Jocasta to Penelope. So Jocasta has some recognition scenes probably on her end too. Penelope, so this is from Book 23 of the Odyssey. If this is really him, if my Odysseus has come back home, we have our ways to recognize each other through secret signs known only to us two. And here Jocasta has a similar kind of moment. Oedipus, at this point, he hasn't recognized the truth yet. Jocasta seems to recognize the truth, however. Oedipus says, what, give up now? Like, give up my quest now? With a clue like this? Fail to solve the mystery of my birth? Not for all the world. Stop. In the name of God, If you love your own life, call off this search. My suffering is enough. I think at this point, Jocasta seems to know what's going on. She's like, oh, dude, he's going to find out that he's my son. So she's probably pretty freaked out here. She realizes that she's married her own son and had children with him. I'm sure she's going through a lot at this moment. Oedipus, however, is still blissfully ignorant, and notice that she cautions him to stop. You know, if he does stop here, maybe he would have continued to live pretty happy. I suppose Thebes would still be in a plague, but anyway, it's kind of interesting, potentially. Okay, but yeah, so Penelope and Jocasta, these kind of secret signs known only to us two. There's a certain point where the two husband and wife here come to know the secret signs of each other, as well as in the Odyssey. Okay, so I'm putting this image back up. This is another version of the painting by Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, depicting Oedipus after he solves the riddle of the Sphinx. This one doesn't have the Sphinx's head as much. I like this one because it emphasizes... So in the other image, Oedipus was locking eyes with the Sphinx. Like, when you look at someone, you come to know them in a sort of intimate way. Here he's locking eyes with these breasts that are evocative, probably representative of potentially his mother's breasts. So the woman he thought was his wife, he realizes is his mother. And that's pretty interesting. So pretty horrible. Like, what a horrible recognition to have. So here's Oedipus's recognition scene, according to me. I mean, you might disagree with this, but this is a scene where we can definitely say that Oedipus has recognized something that he wishes he didn't know anymore. So up till now, especially in the Odyssey, recognition has been such a positive thing. It's a way of coming to deeper knowledge. But here in Oedipus, this deeper knowledge is horrifying. It's something that Oedipus wishes he didn't know. But once he knows it, you can't go back. In a way, this is sort of similar to the epistemological problem in the Garden of Eden. Once Adam and Eve come to the knowledge of good and evil, they can't go back. They've sinned, and they need to be kicked out of Eden. They can't remain because they are as gods in knowing good and evil. So anyway, there's a way in which knowledge itself can be damaging, maturing in a way, but also it can just it destroys your innocence. So here's the scene for Oedipus's innocence being destroyed. This is after Jocasta learns the truth. She realizes the truth before Oedipus does. She runs off into their bedroom and kills herself. She hangs herself in a suicide. Oedipus runs into their bedroom, sees his wife hanging there. He, at this point, realizes the truth, and this is what he does. He ripped off her brooches, the long gold pins holding her robes, lifting them high, looking straight up into the points. He digs them down into the sockets of his eyes, crying, You'll see no more the pain I suffered, all the pain I caused. Too long you looked on the ones you should never have seen, blind to the ones you longed to see, to know. Blind from this hour on, blind in the darkness, blind. His voice, like a dirge, rising over and over, raising the pins, raking them down his eyes, and at each stroke, blood spurts from the roots, splashing his beard, a swirl of it, nerves and clots, black hail of blood pulsing, gushing down. Yikes. Here is when he's talking, you'll see no more the pain I suffered. He's talking directly to his eyes. He's addressing his own eyes. So this is kind of an interesting moment of recognition, where you like objectify the problem in yourself as a part of yourself. So he's seeing his eyes, the thing that drove him to knowledge, he sees them now as the means of his disaster. So he literally is killing his own eyes. He's digging the points of these brooches into his eyes so that he'll be blind. Here, These lines, I think that they're important because they speak to the last thing that Oedipus sees. He rips off her brooches, the long gold pins holding her robes. So to picture this, so his wife is hanging from a noose. He rips off these kind of jewelry bits. They're pins that hold her robes up. These are the things that would be holding her robes up at the shoulders. So if he rips those off, this means that her breasts are now exposed. So actually the last thing he sees before he kills his eyes like this would be her breasts. It's kind of, you might think I'm just being a little bit gross here, and maybe I am, but I find it interesting that, like, and this image here in the painter as well, like, these would be the last thing he sees. The things that, as a husband, he probably found sexual, breasts are typically, acknowledged as sexy in your partner, if you're into that. The thing he sees as sexy, or saw as sexy, he now realizes are maternal. The images themselves, the object of the breasts, I guess, have changed meaning through his knowledge change. If that makes sense. So, yeah. So this is the thing that he's going to have in his mind as he relives this trauma of knowing. Here's like a close-up of that. Okay, so this is a scene of recognition and reversal. According to Aristotle. So this is back to the Aristotelian sort of information. So it's kind of building on it. So in recognition, the startling discovery that produces a change from ignorance to knowledge, Aristotle in his Poetics claims that recognition in this way is most effective when paired with a reversal of fortune. So what he means by that is a reversal of fortune is like if someone starts off high, like high class, like a king, for example, they end up low, slowly, like a servant or like a beggar. You can kind of see the opposite of this in the Odyssey. The recognition scenes that Odysseus takes part in, they correspond to his like raising of fortune. He starts off dressed up like a beggar, but then at the end of the Odyssey, he becomes a king again. It was pretty satisfying, I think, as a conclusion. In Oedipus, that trajectory is completely reversed. So Aristotle holds, so he claims his argument, Aristotle's argument, is that Oedipus the king is the best tragedy because the recognition of Oedipus corresponds at the same moment to his reversal of fortune. So when he rakes his eyes like that, he's basically dooming his fate. So recall Tiresias' prophecy. He said earlier, when Oedipus was ignorant, blind who now has eyes, beggar who now is rich, he will grope his way towards foreign soil, a stick tapping before him step by step. Oedipus has created a situation where, in his seeking the truth, he has basically doomed himself to be publicly exposed and humiliated as a man who's killed his own father and married his own mother. Like, there's really no going back for him at this point. Maybe there was points before where he could have stopped his quest for the truth, but he doesn't. He keeps going, dooming himself. So he finally recognizes the truth. Here's some lines kind of speaking to that. "O God, all come true, all burst to light. O light, now let me look my last on you. I stand revealed at last, cursed in my birth, cursed in marriage, cursed in the lives I cut down with these hands." Yeah, so anyway, he's clearly upset. And note that his what do you call this? His, like, speech is to light itself. So before he was addressing his eyes, and now it's light himself. Light itself. So note that, like, enlightenment comes, mental enlightenment, his realization of the truth also corresponds with his literal blindness. So there's kind of a way in which those things reverse course as well. Blind who now has eyes. Okay, Also recall that Aristotelian sort of, I think I spoke of this in lecture 21. Pity and fear are the most important emotions that Aristotle says are linked to the purpose of tragedy, which is to experience catharsis. So you experience pity and fear in watching this representation on the stage so that you can purge those emotions and be kind of purified in a way, or like achieve catharsis, achieve this purge and feel better. Okay, so the chorus kind of experiences this and then the chorus obviously is a avatar for us as the audience. So we probably feel pity and fear for Oedipus as well. Okay, so here's a depiction of this. Enter Oedipus, blinded, led by a boy. He stands at the palace steps as if surveying his people once again. This is very similar to the opening when Oedipus was standing in front of the altar, surveying his people. But here everything has changed. Now he's blind, so when he's looking at his people, he can't see them. But note that his literal blindness corresponds to his gain in knowledge. He knows much more now, even though he's blind. And he's no longer the king. So this is interesting. He stands in front of the palace steps when he can't be king anymore. Okay, so the chorus says, "Oh, the terror, the suffering for all the world to see, the worst terror that ever met my eyes. What madness swept over you? What god, what dark power leapt beyond all bounds, beyond belief, to crush your wretched life? God-forsaken, cursed by the gods. I pity you, but I can't bear to look. I've much to ask, so much to learn, so much fascinates my eyes, but you, I shudder at the sight." So note here, I mean, they literally say, "I pity you, but I can't bear to look." They pity, but they fear, right? So it's very interesting. The chorus is drawn to Oedipus. Like, I think we would be drawn to him too. We really feel for him. Like, I feel like there has been no one who's suffered like this. This is horrible. And yet that pity, it meets up with this other feeling of like fear and disgust. Like, I am disgusted by Oedipus, and they are too, the chorus. They can't bear to look at him because, I mean, he's horribly ugly now. He's maimed himself, in stabbing out his eyes. But they might also be disgusted by what he's done. He's had 4 children with his own mother. That's pretty hard to forgive. So they're drawn to him, and yet they fear him. So this is totally represented in the chorus, just what Aristotle says should be in a tragedy. Here's Oedipus talking about blinding himself. So the chorus asked him why he did it. So, "Dreadful, what you've done, how could you bear it, gouging out your eyes? What superhuman power drove you on?" Oedipus answers, "Apollo, friends, Apollo. He ordained my agonies. These, my pains on pains. But the hand that struck my eyes was mine alone, no one else. I did it all myself." Okay, so he has 2 answers here. So why did you do this? What superhuman power drove you on? He says, first, it's Apollo. Apollo drove me on. What he's referring to here is not only the god, like the god of enlightenment and knowledge. We talked about him last time. The god of archery, all this stuff. The god of poetry, the god of enlightenment. He's also sort of referring to the Delphian prophecy that Creon had given him. Also, the curse of the original Oedipus baby would have come from Apollo as well. Any sort of prophecy like that, a curse, the curse of Laius and Jocasta is that if they have a child, that child will grow up to kill the father, marry the mother. That, in a way, can stand in for Apollo too. Apollo and this curse. So maybe it's the curse, maybe it's the prophecy, maybe it's Apollo that drove him on. Maybe it's what Apollo represents, which is the quest for knowledge and enlightenment that drew him on. So there's a lot of ways to interpret the meaning of Apollo ordaining his agonies. But then also note that Oedipus claims what drove him on is himself again. So I find this interesting because as much as Oedipus has learned in this play, he still is Oedipus. Remember, one of his opening lines is, "You all know me, I am Oedipus." He sounds rather similar here too. The hand that struck my eyes was mine alone, no one else. I did it myself. Very emphasizing the self here, the ego. And he says later, 20 more lines later, it's mine alone, my destiny, I am Oedipus. So he even has the same line from his opening speech, I am Oedipus. He still seems a little proud of himself. Here is a fun moment. You can picture this staged. Oedipus beckons to the chorus, so he calls them to come closer to him as they shrink away. So pity, fear here too. Closer, it's all right. Touch the man of grief. Don't be afraid. My troubles are mine, and I am the only man alive who can sustain them. Yikes. So he seems very proud of the fact that, where his ego was rooted in his pride of his abilities, now it seems like his ego is rooted in his pride of his ability to endure. I find this interesting. A lot of people would argue that Oedipus should just kill himself. In fact, that's sort of what we're invited to think throughout the play, that he keeps cursing the murderer of Laius. He keeps, saying that he's going to bring the murderer to justice. We assume that means like murder the murderer, but when he's given the opportunity, he doesn't murder himself, he murders his eyes, basically, and he remains alive. Very interesting. I wonder why he doesn't kill himself. So here's some things to kind of note here. Note the freedom that comes with ruin. Sometimes when everyone turns against you, sometimes that's that can be a source of strength. It's like you've already lost, you've lost your reputation. You don't have to care about that stuff anymore. And so you can be very free with being totally ruined or abject, in a way. This is like, if someone has kind of like cashed in on their bad reputation. It's like, well, you guys already hate me. Might as well, do all I can to like make money off of the situation, this is kind of those sorts of things. You probably can think of examples from the real world where that has happened to a person. And then one other thing to note here too is his claim that his troubles are his own and he's the only man alive who can sustain them. I don't know if this is necessarily true. Are his troubles only his? He does have 4 children. Towards the end of the play, we have this moment, Oedipus begging Creon for help. So Oedipus has rendered himself unable to rule. Like, there's no way that Thebes is going to allow Oedipus to continue being the king. He's a murderer, he's incestuous, and he's like blinded himself. He's basically publicly exposed all of his dirty laundry in his family. They're not going to be cool with him continuing to be king. And so Creon, his uncle / brother-in-law, will ascend to the throne, and he'll be the king in our next play, Antigone. Okay, so Oedipus is begging Creon, who is now king, for help. He says, in regards to his children, he says, don't let them go begging, abandoned, women without men. Your own flesh and blood, never bring them down to the level of my pains. Pity them. Look at them, so young, so vulnerable, shorn of everything. You're their only hope. Promise me, noble Creon, touch my hand. Reaching toward Creon, who draws back. So everyone's afraid of Oedipus. Then Oedipus addresses his little daughters directly. You little ones, if you were old enough to understand, there is much I'd tell you. Now, as it is, I'd have you say a prayer. Pray for life, my children. Live where you are free to grow in season. Pray God you find a better life than mine, the father who begot you. Things to note here, Oedipus has 4 children. He has 2 sons named Polynices and Eteocles, and he has 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. He has a moment here where he is begging on behalf of his children, but specifically he's begging on behalf of his daughters. So you might ask yourself, why does he not pay attention to his sons? Why is he overly concerned with his daughters? There's legitimate reasons for this. Women without men. It is harder for a woman in Greece to live than a man. But we'll talk next time about the ways in which his over-concern with his daughters and his neglect of his sons might be fulfilling patterns that he himself is guilty of fulfilling, which would be over concern with the female member of his family and under concern with the male. So there is a way in which these Freudian Oedipal conflicts kind of morph onto the next generation. Yeah. Okay. One other thing for next time to kind of to keep in your mind is Sophocles is adding to the tradition established by Aeschylus. I was already sort of inviting you to think of it that way, but the middle play that we won't be reading, Oedipus, he is in exile outside of Thebes, and he's hounded by the Furies. He's hounded by the Humanities / Furies, who are like hounding him about his blood crimes. Because after all, he has killed his own father. So he's kind of in a similar but very different situation that Orestes found himself in. Orestes killed his own mother. Oedipus kills his own father. So it's kind of a kind of similar parallel plot in a way. So I'm going to end there, but just with a couple of reflection questions just to help guide you as you post your discussion posts. These are questions that I have that remain. You might have others as well. I'm curious what you think is the point where Jocasta knows the truth about Oedipus, namely that it's not just her new husband, but rather it's her son who she's married to and who has, impregnated her several times. You might compare this to the Odyssey. At what point does Penelope recognize her husband? Because I think that was an open question there too. What importance are the gods to this play? That might be specifically like how is Apollo important in this play, or what is the importance of the gods in general? Like we do have priests and representatives of the gods in this play. We don't have the gods themselves as characters as we did in Aeschylus. So I wonder what you think of that. With what is Sophocles' motivation for having a play that largely is a warning to honor the gods, and yet he doesn't have the gods themselves on stage. I find that interesting. Anyway, you might have similar questions. How does this play alter our understanding of kleos and nostos, these sort of Homeric laden values that still feature in all Greek works, basically, at this time at least? How does Oedipus, how is he someone who values kleos? How is he someone who values nostos? Or maybe he undermines these values. And there's probably more. So these are the sorts of questions I hope you talk about. Not just summary questions, but questions that speak to something specific about the play. Okay, so those are those. And then homework for next class, we're skipping Oedipus at Colonus. This is when he's mainly hounded by the Furies and all that, and he's interacting with his daughters and sons. We're not reading that part. Instead, for homework for next time, for next Tuesday, please read Antigone. That's the third play in this cycle. I'll post some guiding questions for that play on NYU Brightspace to help you understand the text as you read it. Okay, I'm going to end it there.